Hi guys, my name's Ed, and up until 10 years ago, I struggled with really bad social anxiety. In fact, it got so bad that I couldn't leave the house. I was relying on alcohol and prescription medication, and I had to even pay a psychiatrist to walk me around town because I didn't feel I knew how to walk. I couldn't move my arms comfortably. I felt very clunky. I was too self-conscious to even walk around. So he would go out into town with me and walk behind me about 10 meters behind and shout directions at me like swing your arms loosely, relax, look other people in the eye, this kind of stuff. So it got so bad that I couldn't really do anything or function socially. I couldn't go into shops, I couldn't use the phone. I'd basically become a recluse. And I have a real background in anxiety and mental health issues. My mum also had terrible anxiety and social anxiety all through her life, and she ended up getting addicted to prescription medication and alcohol. I had two older brothers, and they both also had very bad anxiety and social anxiety. And my oldest brother actually ended up dying of a drugs overdose when he was 26 because of the drugs he was using to self-medicate his anxiety problems. So I'm sorry, I realize that's a lot of heavy stuff right off the bat, but I just want to share that so that you will know that I know what I'm talking about. I've been through the struggle, I've been through the battle. Over those decades of struggle, I managed to find my way out of social anxiety. And in this video, I want to share 12 things which I stopped doing, which really helped me overcome social anxiety. So the first thing I stopped doing to overcome social anxiety was I stopped avoiding the problem. Up until the age of 32, I hadn't addressed the issue. I didn't really know that I had social anxiety. I just thought I was strange and weird and shy and awkward. I didn't know it was a thing. I didn't know it had a name. And I just avoided the problem altogether, and I avoided any situations which made me uncomfortable, which led to me then becoming basically a recluse who was taking a lot of drugs and just being isolated and starting to go into a really bad place with my mental health. So when I got to the age of 32 and made this commitment to completely start sorting my life out and overcome social anxiety, I then just started to push myself head on into situations which I was scared of. As soon as I felt that resistance to doing something, then I knew I had to do that. At first, it started off with small things like going into the supermarket or speaking to a cashier rather than use the self-checkout, or picking up the phone to actually speak to someone rather than send them a message. Any situation where I was trying to avoid, I would start going into and start exposing myself to it. And you don't want to throw yourself into this headlong right away. For me, it started off gradually, and I definitely recommend that for people. You don't want to just throw yourself into stuff. But when there's that internal resistance, when you feel that feeling coming up and you know that you're putting something off because it's just that you're scared of doing it, then that is really the time when you have to tune into yourself and think, right, that's what I have to go into. That's the uncomfortable place that I have to lean into. So I started to kind of develop this reflex. When I felt scared or felt that resistance, I was like, right, that's telling me that that's the fear and that's the thing I have to go and do. And as I progressed with this, I started to actually really kind of enjoy it and push my boundaries even further. I would do silly things like challenges where I would go and lie down in the street and draw attention to myself deliberately, which to other people who haven't been through these issues, that might look silly or trivial, but for me, it was like this mind-blowing adventure where I was doing stuff that I never thought I could do before. You know, lying down in a crowded shopping mall or on the street in London was a massive deal for me because I'd spent my whole life trying to hide away and not draw attention to myself, be as invisible as possible. So this was really liberating. It was a massive rush, and I do recommend it for people if you get to a point where that feels manageable for you. And these little exposures, this idea of like leaning into the difficult place, it became something that I called taking the path of most resistance. And as part of overcoming social anxiety, right around the same time, I was starting to work out and get into fitness. And I heard a tip from a friend. He was like, wherever you can, just do the thing that's going to make you a bit healthier and a bit fitter. So take the stairs on the subway rather than the escalator. Carry your shopping home rather than get a taxi. Whatever it was, things where you could actually test your muscle and build a bit of fitness. Try and build that as a habit into your life. And I started to take this on board with my social anxiety. So anywhere where I could take the path of most resistance. So in real life, that looked like having face-to-face interactions rather than using a screen to check out in McDonald's or in the supermarket. Wherever I could, just build a little bit of resistance in and have more contact and stop avoiding interactions with people. I would go and seek that out and start taking the path of most resistance. And also I started to develop something that I called the social reflex, which was wherever I was, I would just push myself to say hello to someone. If I was in an elevator with just another person, I would ask them how they are, how they're doing, or I would go into a shop and I would say, how's it going? I would always try and add a little bit more to the interaction rather than just silently getting my goods and then rushing out as I used to do as quickly as possible. I'd push myself just to try and have a bit more chit chat. And that could be in many different situations throughout the day, but it became a kind of a reflex to the point that where I am now, if I'm stood next to someone at a desk waiting to check out in a shop, or I'm stood next to someone in an elevator or wherever I am, I would just like make the effort to start a conversation with them, and it just becomes reflexive. The second thing I stopped to overcome social anxiety was I stopped comparing myself to others. And the same psychiatrist that used to walk me around town, he gave me one very useful piece of advice which cut off a lot of my comparison. Up until that point, I used to look at other people, and this is very common for people with social anxiety. You look at other people and you think, they're like a different species. Like, how can they be so comfortable in that meeting? How can they just flow and laugh and be so relaxed? And it makes you feel even worse about yourself. You feel so isolated and so distant from these other people. It's almost as if they're a different species. And you just really wonder, like, what is it inside of them? What happened to them growing up? How did they become like this? And there was one guy that I used to work with who was extremely confident, very popular, and it made me feel even worse about where I was because he was younger than me. And my psychiatrist just turned around to me and he said, it's not a level playing field. And that really cut off a lot of my thinking at its root, because you watching this now, you have your own set of background causes and conditions, your own karma, if you like. You will have probably experienced uniquely subtle, invisible, psychological trauma and abuse, whether it's from parents or other children when you were growing up, people around you. We all have this. When we develop social anxiety, it's usually through some form of emotional, psychological abuse. I have my own karma, my own causes and conditions in the family. My parents were abused, so then that came down to us. And the same is probably true for you. So it's apples and oranges. You can't compare yourself to somebody else, because this guy that I was comparing myself, he was from a very affluent background. The family were doctors in North America. They used to take beautiful family holidays on the lakes, blah, blah, blah. My family were drug addicts. My brother was a heroin addict. Me and my brother were doing drugs. My mum was taking prescription drugs. We were fighting all the time. We were totally dysfunctional. So how can I compare my life to this guy who's really socially confident and happy in himself at that point? So it's just really unhelpful to compare yourself. Although it's a hard habit to break, it really helps to stop comparing yourself, because it's not a level playing field. The people that you look at and think they're doing way better than you, they didn't have the causes and conditions that you grew up with. And also social media encourages a lot of this comparison. So I found just cutting out a lot of social media helped me. I stopped using so much social media, and that cut off the comparison. The third thing I stopped doing was I stopped eating a lot of crap. I used to eat really badly when I was anxious and depressed before. I didn't know anything about health or fitness. So I used to eat a lot of junk, and I didn't even understand that my state of mind and how I felt in my body was related to the rubbish that I was eating. So I stopped eating a lot of crap. I started to eat a lot healthier. And the fourth thing I stopped doing, which is related to this, is I stopped lying around. And before, I used to smoke cannabis and lie around, be very lazy and passive and inactive, just ruminate, have my mind just running wild with all this anxiety and depressive thoughts and all the rest of it, and just lie on the sofa stoned and that kind of thing. And then when I started to overcome social anxiety, I really got into health and fitness, and that obviously is related to not eating crap as well. I started to look after my diet, I started to work out. And this was just positive in so many ways, because it didn't give me the time to ruminate. I was more active, it was releasing endorphins and all this stuff. A lot of other stuff that I've talked about on my channel. But getting active was really important, just not lying around, because the devil loves idle hands. And if you don't have anything to do constructive with your body and mind, you're just going to start thinking of a lot of anxiety-inducing stuff. The fifth thing I stopped doing was I stopped filtering myself. And this was really a huge cause of my social anxiety before. I would want to say things, but I would second guess them, and I would doubt whether it was the right thing to say. I felt like I didn't really understand where the correct lines were in social situations of what is okay to say and what isn't okay. And what I discovered is that there's no right answer to stuff. You can be honest and true to yourself and just say whatever it is, even if it's quirky or whatever. If it's positive and it comes from the heart, that was my rule of thumb that I discovered, people will respond to it. I thought that there had to be like a cool answer or the right thing to say, but I realized I could say anything as trivial, whimsical, idiosyncratic as I liked. If it was genuine, people just responded to the energy behind it. So I really grew in confidence to stop filtering myself and just say whatever came off the top of my head. And as I say, what I discovered is if it's positive and authentic and genuine, then it can't be wrong. My mistake before when I was younger as well is I tried to say cool stuff or be sarcastic or try and come off in a certain way, and that doesn't work. What people really respond to is just the authenticity. Even if you've got the weirdest thing to say, like, I'm late today because I was walking my cat around the block, and people are like, whoa, you walk your cat. What the heck is that all about? You can say whatever you want, but it's just about the authenticity and the energy behind what you're saying. So I just really stopped filtering myself, and that opened up a whole new range of social connections. The sixth thing I stopped doing, which is related to this, is I stopped trying to be cool. When I was younger and I had really bad social anxiety, I was very locked up and rigid, and I thought I had to be like cool and macho and alternative and into like underground hip hop and drum and bass and smoke drugs and all this stuff. And I didn't realize how much this was isolating me from other people and turning people off me. And there was a really interesting example in my life when I was living in China and I had a friend who was much bigger, much more confident, really popular. And we were in a club and we were dancing with these girls, and I was trying to be cool. I was not touching the girl I was with. I was distant from her and trying to do cool dancing and all this kind of stuff. And then I looked over at him and he was just spinning his partner around like in a whimsical like ballroom dancing kind of way. And she was loving it because he was just having fun. But that whole time that I was going through so much social anxiety, I was making it worse for myself by thinking I had to be cool, macho, sarcastic. I had to come up with like a funny remark all the time. And I never smiled at that point. I was very locked down and very rigid. And when I just learned to relax, I learned to smile a lot more and just drop this whole thing of trying to be cool all the time. And people just responded to me way more because I was just relaxed and smiling and happy. The seventh thing I stopped doing was I stopped being so formal. I was brought up in a very rigid kind of Victorian style household from my mum, who was very strict. And I used to feel that there were all these levels I had to go through before I could be relaxed around someone. It was like this idea in my mind of different thresholds. So I'd be like, oh, nice to meet you, Mr. Johnson. And then it would take like 5 or 6 meetings with this person for me to start loosening up and relaxing. And what I realized is that people love informality in the right place, obviously to the right degree, but they love intimacy and connection. So I started to learn that I could just like shake someone's hand and give them a pat on the back and be like, hey, great to meet you, and start to really express what I felt rather than be overly respectful and overly formal. And it created this real rigidity, and it took ages for me to get to know people and relax and loosen up around them. What I found is that you can assume familiarity with people. Human nature is that we're social primates and we love that connection. So people really love it. If you're like, hey, nice to meet you, I would start talking to people as if I'd almost already met them before. And they would look at me and respond in a way of like, oh, it's almost like we know each other already. And it was just way more comfortable, and you could feel the connection growing way quicker rather than me holding myself back in these kind of like thresholds that I felt I had to go through, these stages or gears that I had to work through. And I've talked about this with clients who've been through a similar thing. They were overly serious, overly tense, overly formal, and it was holding them back from having these nice, close, intimate, fun connections with people. The eighth thing I stopped doing was being passive. When I was really anxious and depressed, I had this idea that I was a really good person. I was like a diamond in the rough, but the universe hadn't discovered me. It was like up to other people to come and figure out how great I was. And then, why was I 30 years old and not having any sex and living at home with my parents? Why was the world so unfair? Surely someone should come and rescue me. The world should recognize my value. People should come and find me. And I thought like going out on speed dating or meeting people through meetups, this was all inorganic and false and artificial. I didn't realize that you have to be proactive. You have to go out and join groups. You have to pick up hobbies. You have to push yourself out there, get yourself out there, market yourself, promote yourself, actually proactively go out and meet people. I somehow had this really misguided notion, like even when I was like 30, 31 years old, that somehow someone was going to come and save me. The universe was going to discover my true value and what a great person I was. So I flipped this around and I stopped being passive. I started to pick up new hobbies. I picked up jiu-jitsu. I started going out to groups. I started doing Toastmasters, public speaking, lots of different things. And it was just like a paradigm shift that, oh yeah, no one's coming to save you. You actually have to put yourself out there. And obviously that's really hard when you have low self-esteem because you don't feel comfortable drawing attention to yourself or promoting yourself in any way. But that's really what you have to do. You actually have to get out there because at the end of the day, nothing is going to change. No one's coming to save you. You have to do it yourself. Number 9 is I stopped making excuses for myself. When I had really bad social anxiety, I would always cancel engagements at the last minute or just not go to something. I would tell myself, oh, that person doesn't mind if I just cancel via text message at the last minute, that thing that I said I was going to go to. People cancel stuff all the time. They won't mind. It doesn't matter. People do this. It's fine. Or I would find an excuse not to get off the sofa and go and do that thing that I said I was going to do, like join a meetup group or go and push myself out of my comfort zone. It's very, very easy to make excuses for yourself, to think, it doesn't matter, I'll do it next week. It's probably going to be rubbish anyway. There's probably not going to be anyone there that I'm going to connect with and it won't be comfortable. And what I found is when I stopped making excuses for myself and I started going to these events, the follow-on, the positive ripple-out effects were way bigger than I could ever anticipate. And you tell yourself, oh, it's no big deal, I won't meet anyone there. But the funny thing is, you meet someone there and then they introduce you to someone else and then 10 years later you're still friends, and there's these crazy connections that come through actually just opening yourself up and doing stuff. Whereas when you make excuses, it's so easy just to shut everything down and be like, no, I'm not missing out on anything, it's fine, I'll go next week or the week after that. It doesn't matter anyway. Like, it really matters. What I found is when I started to push myself out and do stuff and stop making excuses, all these crazy connections would open up, these karmic connections, and you would meet people and it would lead on to different things in far more interesting and complex ways than you can ever imagine. So I had to stop making excuses for myself and telling myself, it's no big deal, I'll go next week, I'm not missing out on anything, people don't mind. People do mind when you cancel. It causes a problem for them and they give up on you in the end. It does matter if you don't go out to that meetup group because you are missing out on a chance to create these connections. So I just stopped making these excuses for myself and started to push myself to do these things. Number 10 is I stopped wallowing in negativity. Prior to turning things around when I was 32 and really overcoming social anxiety, I was a very negative, pessimistic person, and I would kind of wallow in my problems. I would go on Reddit, see all these people in there wallowing in their self-pity. I would call up my brother and we would laugh about the kind of dysfunctional stuff we had done and like what a mess we were, and oh yeah, I tried to speak to a person in a shop and then I got really red and I just freaked out and I had to leave the shop. And we would kind of laugh and commiserate, but we were like trauma bonding over how dysfunctional we were. And also I would have relationships with people, either romantic or friendships, and it would be a kind of trauma bonding. I would be drawn to people with very low self-esteem and we would commiserate about how messed up our lives were and how bad our social anxiety was. But when I started to really flip things around and change my life, I stopped watching Reddit. I stopped hanging out with people who I knew had low self-esteem and were just making me feel better because we were trauma bonded and they were also dysfunctional. I stopped watching the news because it's not meant to educate you, it's just meant to trigger you and activate your amygdala and sell sensational, crisis, negative news. So I stopped watching the news. I stopped hanging out with negative people. I had to even cut people in my family out. I had to just cut different people out of my life and cut out negative activities and just stop wallowing in self-pity and negativity and retrain my brain to become optimistic and positive. Number 11 is I stopped thinking so much. And really there's a huge correlation between how much we think and how unhappy we are. And I ended up becoming a monk in Japan because I was always fascinated with the mind. And what I learned in Japan is that when you can stop thinking, your unhappiness goes away basically. Most people in modern society, and I definitely was, a total slave to my thoughts, a slave to my mind. And an untrained mind will just run you ragged and can drive you to suicide and all kinds of crazy things. So I learned to stop thinking, and this was through meditation practice and also through my time in Japan, just learning to cut thoughts, to not get so carried away in thought, because thinking really is the root cause of unhappiness, and it's definitely the root cause of a lot of social anxiety. Should I do this? Should I say this? Or should I go to the coffee shop and meet this person? What if this happens? What if I say this and then this happens? It's all to do with thinking. So I had to really dedicate myself to not thinking so much. This was done through meditation, but also just training myself to notice I'm thinking, stop thinking, okay? And this is called thought cutting in Japan. My teacher would say, cut the thoughts. Just don't indulge it, because it is an indulgence. It's a habit when we go off into thinking. And people often say, like, well, how do you stop thinking? You train yourself to do it. You have to just stop. I'm thinking, stop it, get on with what I'm doing, stop it, and just absorb yourself in the present moment in your task. So I really had to train myself to stop thinking. And when I did, as I thought less, my happiness increased, and as I thought less, my social anxiety went down and my happiness increased as well. The 12th and final thing that I stopped doing, which was massive, is I stopped hating myself. For my whole life, I'd grown up with really, really bad self-esteem. I thought it was totally natural to beat myself up and criticize myself. And my logic was, of course I hate myself because I know all my innermost flaws. Other people don't know all my flaws and how bad I am. So that's natural that I would hate myself so much. I didn't realize what a wrong-headed and unhealthy and damaging way this was to think. So I really put effort and time into fostering self-esteem and boosting my self-esteem. And there's other videos on this channel that talk about that. But I started to really analyze like who I was, where are my strengths, started to appreciate myself for stuff that I just didn't even think of before. And before, my understanding of self-esteem was quite two-dimensional. I used to think, well, I'm not 6'5" and bulging with muscles with rock hard abs, therefore of course I shouldn't have good self-esteem. But there's things that you can really love about yourself, which come from doing personality tests and studying yourself and learning more about yourself. And I came to appreciate a lot of stuff about myself, like the fact that I'm generally optimistic, that I have a lot of enthusiasm, that I do love life, that I like helping people, that I enjoy encouraging other people, trying to bring the best out in them. There are all these subtle things that you learn about yourself that you really appreciate. And you learn little lessons in life. There was a month when I was really sick, and I couldn't do any of the things that I normally could do. And then in retrospect, I looked back and was like, wow, actually, I have a great life because I get out of bed, I have enthusiasm for what I'm doing, I get to help people in my coaching practice. So you can even do thought experiments where you look at, like, if I couldn't do anything, if I was in a coma, what would I miss about my life now? So by looking in very fine detail at who I am and understanding more about my personality and my makeup, I really got a much greater appreciation for who I am. And like I say, it's not just about my height and my looks that I used to think were so important. It's much more about the fact that I feel like genuinely I care about people. Genuinely, I want to see the world improve. Genuinely, I want to help others to improve and change some of the bad things that are happening in society. These are things that you can really appreciate about yourself. So there's lots to love about yourself, and it can really help to like put a microscope on yourself, doing personality tests and just learning, studying yourself and realizing, wow, there's a lot I have going for me. And it's all about where you put your focus as well. Of course, we can all focus on the things that we don't have, but by focusing on the things that you do have and that you're grateful for, it can really boost your self-esteem. So these are 12 things that I stopped doing. They really helped me overcome social anxiety. I hope they'll help you too. Check out the other videos on the channel here and here, and I'll see you soon.